It's 1996, and a 730-foot Canadian ore carrier is in the middle of one of the oddest projects done on a cargo vessel. The vessel is being built with a new hull, but not just any ordinary hull, a hull that featured one of the oddest, yet simple designs ever. Let's look at the history of this unique hull replacement design and if it even paid off. This is the mostly unknown history and story of the craziest hull design. The origin for the reshaping of these ships' hulls to their unique profiles came when the St. Lawrence Seaway was lengthened and widened in the mid-1990s. Vessels that were originally max size for their locks were now shorter in length and width compared to the new lock sizes. Of course, companies didn't want to lose out on revenue, as more cargo capacity equals more money, so they thought of ways to take advantage of this. Therefore, they came up with widening the ship. This meant replacement needed to be done, considering that a new section of the hull would be added. But what specifically needed to be replaced? Well, to know that, we have to look into the architecture of a vessel. From the bow to the stern, the hull of a ship is rectangular, curving at the bow and stern. This rectangular part of the hull is where the cargo hold is situated, which is surrounded by ballast tanks both below and to the sides of it. These tanks on the two sides of the cargo hold are called the side tanks. The bottom of the cargo hold, or what you would call the floor, is more accurately called the tank top. The true bottom of the ship would be what is the shell. This is the exterior layer of steel. This bottom shell and the tank top are typically separated by a tank and a structure referred to as the double bottom. In order for these ships to be widened, all of them had to have their side tanks and shells removed and replaced. So let's look into the story of each of these vessels. The Timastool was built in 1967 as the Senville, and is actually quite notable in that she was the second ship on the Great Lakes to have all of her accommodations, machinery, and pilothouse at the back, the first being the Silver Isle. She also featured the lightest weight steel that could still pass certification. The ship at the time measured 730 feet in length, 75 feet in width, 39 feet in depth, and had a maximum carrying capacity of 28,200 tons. The Senville would serve mostly in the grain and ore trades, although the ship's trade routes would take their toll on the vessel, as iron ore would be loaded on the vessel in a quite fast and dirty manner, so that the vessel would have a quick turnaround time, because time is money on the lakes. But the loading process of a vessel is crucial for the safety of the vessel and its longevity. If the loading is sloppy, then it can stress the hull. In the Senville's case, this would eventually cause the double bottom to collapse. So, the vessel would have the bottom shell and double bottom cut out and replaced. In 1994, the company that owned the Senville at the time, Great Lakes Bulk Carriers, collapsed and the vessel would be purchased by Algoma Central Corporation. The vessel would be renamed Algoville. But something was wrong. The side tanks on the vessel were in bad condition. So right after purchasing the vessel, Algoma planned their replacement. The original idea was to just replace the inner framing and interior bulkheads, but after some engineers at the Port Wella dry dock suggested that they instead replace the outer shells in its entirety, they changed their plans. This way, the ship could take full advantage of the new widening of the seaway. The project would cost $6.3 million. The Algoville would be widened by 3 feet to match the maximum width of 78 feet, with a transition to the original width just below the spar deck. 3 feet doesn't sound like much, but it would increase the cargo carrying capacity from 28,200 tons to 31,054 tons. That's a 2,854 ton difference. By October 19, 1996, the project was done after starting on June 2, 1996. The next vessel that would receive the unique treatment would be the CSL Tadoussac, which was built in 1969 for Canada Steamship Lines. The ship was also quite notable in that she was the last vessel built for CSL to have her pilot house at the bow and the first to have her unloading system at the stern. On top of that, the vessel featured a 3-belt system, meaning that she had 3 unloading belts running parallel to each other. The CSL Tadoussac measured 730 feet in length, 75 feet in width, 41 feet in depth, and had a maximum carrying capacity of 29,700 tons. The ship served in the trade of iron ore, coal, and limestone, but in 2000, Canada Steamship Lines was awarded with a cement clinker contract from St. Mary's Cement. This was a major contract. So the company chose to modernize the Tadoussac for the cement clinker trade. On December 15th, 2000, the ship was floated in the dry dock at Port Willa Dry Docks and had the old side tanks and outer shells replaced and widened. Like the Algoville, the new outer shells would transition into the original width, although farther below the spar deck from the Algoville. The ship would also have her 3-part unloading system replaced with a copper cargo hold and a single unloading belt. On top of that, her unloading system would feature remotely operated gates and a dust control system for the cement clinker. This brought the Tadoussac to a new width of 77 feet and 11 inches and a new maximum carrying capacity of 30,051 tons. On June 13, 2001, the Tadoussac would set sail again, this time with the name CSL Tadoussac and a new gray paint job. The John D. Leach was built in 1967 as a Canadian century and is quite significant in that a lot went into her design. Upper Lake Shipping had just been awarded a major coal hauling contract for Ontario Hydro, which raised the question, how can we maximize cubic capacity while staying within the constraints of the Welland Canal and St. Lawrence Seaway? So the president of Upper Lake Shipping, John D. Leach, met with engineers from marine consultants and designers and professors from the University of Michigan Department of Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering to design a vessel that would make history. What they came up with is a ship that would have a single cargo hold along with a single unloading belt. The slopes would be pointed away from the vessel and would be directed onto the belt by a reclaimer machine that moved along the length of the cargo hold. These machines are all but gone, with the Algoma transport being scrapped 2 years ago. The ship would also feature a more boxy design. At launch, the Canadian Century measured 730 feet in length, 75 feet in width, 45 feet in depth, and had a maximum carrying capacity of 20,343 tons. But the ship would receive many modifications to her unloading system in her career. One of these would be over the winter of 1975 to 1976, when her original bucket elevator was replaced with a C-loop system, which was more efficient. This enabled the Century to take on her first load of taconite pellets in 1986. Over the winter of 2001 and 2002 would be when she received her biggest modification yet. 6 months before the ship would receive the modification at Port Willa Dry Docks, new hull sections had been built to replace the old ones, as the ship needed to renew certain sections of the hull. The Century would also receive updates to her unloading system, among some other things. What was unique about the widening of the Canadian Century was that only certain parts of the double bottom would be replaced. The rest of the project would be like the other vessels, as her side tanks were removed and the outer shells were widened to 77 feet and 11 inches, with a transition to the original width just below her spar deck. Other modifications would sadly result in its reclaimer machine being removed and substituted with front-end loaders that would now push the cargo onto the belt. The Century would also have her unloading and ballast controls modernized, along with a controllable pitch peller from the recently retired Canadian Venture. The Canadian Century now had a maximum carrying capacity of 28,000 tons, compared to its original of 20,343 tons, adding almost 8,000 tons of cargo capacity. The Century was rechristened and renamed John D. Leach in 2002. In 2011, the Leach was sold to Algoma Central Corporation, along with all of the other ships in the fleet, but still kept her name. The Atlantic Huron is quite different from the other vessels that have received widening, as the ship has seen many more places than the rest. The Atlantic Huron was built in 1984 as the Prairie Harvest for Canada Steamship Lines. The Harvest measured 736 feet in length, 75 feet in width, 46 feet in depth, and had a maximum carrying capacity of 36,900 tons. The vessel's first modification would come in 1989, when the ship would be converted to a self-unloader. The ship's self-unloading system would include 2 conveyor belts and a C-loop elevator. The Harvest was renamed Atlantic Huron and entered service again on November 30th, 1989. After this, many of her routes would be on the ocean. In 1997, the Atlantic Huron would be modified along with 2 other fleet mates, the Nanatoke and the Atlantic Erie, to enable them to carry magnetite ore ballast to the Hibernia oil rig, which was being constructed off the coast of Newfoundland. Each ship carried 4 loads to the rig. Later, the Atlantic Huron would be reflagged as Canadian, and her routes would be shifted back to the Great Lakes region, again in the early 2000s. One problem remained, though. After sailing on the ocean, the ship needed some hull replacement for the outer shells and replacement for the ballast tanks. If this didn't happen, the ship couldn't remain in service. So over the winter of 2002 to 2003, the Huron was dry docked at Port Royal Dry Docks and had her side tanks replaced with wider sections and the outer shells replaced, like all the other vessels. In the end, the Atlantic Huron was widened by about 2 feet to take advantage of the recently widened seaway, like the others. The transition back to the normal width would be similar to the CSL Tadoussac, just below the spar deck, but further down than the other 2 vessels. The Atlantic Huron set sail again on May 4th, 2003, with a new width of 77 feet and 11 inches and a new carrying capacity of 34,860 tons. But did all this pay off? Well, considering that the Atlantic Huron is the only remaining of the 3 vessels to have trade routes on the ocean for Canada steamship lines in the 1990s, the others being the Nanticoke and Atlantic Erie, which were both later scrapped, the worth of its widening project proved to be fruitful. But that's not it. As far as the other vessels that were widened, all are still in service, except for the Temestua, which recently ran aground and is currently in layup, but not scrapped, and have remained so in spite of other ships from their same era heading to the scrapyard. It is certain that these widening projects increased revenue due to their increased cargo capacity and meant that the vessels could operate for longer since the sides of their hulls were replaced. Overall, the widening of these vessels has certainly proved its worth, not only in adding cargo capacity, but also in lifespan. Anyway, subscribe for more shipping information videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.